how do you see this whole thing?
Well, I think there's probably more at stake for DeSantis tonight. He has put a lot more into Iowa. I do still think, despite the latest Des Moines NBC poll, I do still think that DeSantis will finish second. I think he has a stronger ground operation there than Nikki Haley does. But Nikki Haley probably finishes a very close second or potentially first in New Hampshire. Ultimately, though, Andrea, there's still a firewall in South Carolina. Trump's winning there by 25 points. Super Tuesday states all line up for Donald Trump. And so I would imagine after we get through South Carolina, we'll know who our nominee is for the Republican Party.
And Susan Del Precio, the ground game in Iowa, where DeSantis went to all 99 counties, he's been so strong, you know, in terms of pouring all of his money in there, staying there. So what's the strategy after Iowa? You know, John Sununu said, well, he's not going to come to New Hampshire, but he hasn't said that. You know, DeSantis has not said he's not going there.
Let's not forget Chris Christie said he was still running no matter what, all the way to the end until he dropped out the next day. So I think, you know, the interesting thing about DeSantis is I actually think he may pull out a win tonight, not just because of his ground game, but because we haven't talked about it much. Governor Kim Reynolds, she has an operation. She endorsed him, and she actually is in a position, if he doesn't come in second, of looking really, really bad. But as far as DeSantis goes, my guess is he goes silent for a few days, and we hear from him in Florida saying that he's suspending his campaign.
And Jen, Iowa has not, as we've been saying, chosen the eventual GOP nominee in more than 2 decades. I guess the last person to win Iowa, Republican caucus winner, to win and go on to get the nomination was George W. Bush, right? So we've seen a lot of losing candidates in the past. So why is this different at all, given that Donald Trump was previously president? How important is it tonight for the race ahead? And what if he goes over 50%? Does that lock it up?
I think if he goes over 50%, that is a big, you know, that is a big, strong, that's a big sign of strength. But what I think about is, like, look at the next 8 weeks, Andrea, because you have, you have 4 important primary contests: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. And then you also, alongside of that, we have a lot of court appearances from Trump, decisions on the, Colorado hearing for the Supreme Court, decision on his immunity plea. His trial may actually start on March 4th, the Jan 6th trial in D.C. Super Tuesday is March 5th. If he looked weaker in Iowa than expected, weaker in New Hampshire than expected, all of a sudden his strategy about making the courthouse the centerpiece of his communication strategy, that might look like a bad idea. He might appear to be weaker in other ways. And then I'm looking at, what is his turnout like? What's the enthusiasm like for him? Haley's support, there's a lot of Democrats that are voting for Haley today in Iowa. People are not going to vote for Haley or Donald Trump in the general election. They're going to vote for Joe Biden. So I'm also thinking about, is Trump taking a lot of lumps from Haley, Chris Christie? You know, his message was so powerful the other day, anti-Trump message. The messages people are hearing now may not prevent Donald Trump from becoming the Republican nominee, but they could hurt him in the general election. You know, Joe Biden is doing great versus Donald Trump in New Hampshire. I think that may be because New Hampshire voters have heard a lot of anti-Trump messaging. So I'm looking at this more about, how does the next 8 weeks shape the general election?
Well, at an event in Iowa last night, let's listen to what DeSantis had to say about Nikki Haley as part of his final pitch to the voters.
Fact of the matter is, I'm the only one that could possibly compete with Donald Trump in a Republican primary. She cannot win conservative or core voters, Republicans. She's trying to win, people in the other party, which is fine in a general.
Mark, do you agree with that assessment?
Well, not entirely. I think the reality is that our party still has not left Donald Trump. And so I'm not sure that either of them can actually defeat Donald Trump in a primary. And in a general election, everybody looks at these what-if scenarios, and I think that the polling has indicated that Nikki Haley is stronger. But I think, as Jen said, in some cases, I think those are protest votes of Democrats or independents who are looking for a different nominee than Donald Trump. They're not going to vote for Nikki Haley in a general election. And so I think some of that polling is a little bit skewed at this point, too.
And to Susan Del Precio, and when you look at the Republican field, is there an appetite for an anti-Trump candidate? We've seen now with a new ad today that Nikki Haley is a little bit tougher against Trump. In a New Hampshire ad, she hasn't been that tough. She's kind of evolved in the Iowa campaign. But the base support still seems to be so solidly Trump.
It is behind Trump because neither DeSantis or Haley has shown a real contrast between them and Donald Trump, and in fact has not gone after Donald Trump the way you would in any other situation, or the way DeSantis and Haley are going after each other now. This is right now Donald Trump's party. He is the nominee unless he does something, to take himself out of it. So at the end of the day, I think we look, maybe Nikki Haley does well in New Hampshire and there's a lot of energy behind her. But again, Super Tuesday with the rule changes of winner take all in several states, it ends there on March 5th.
And Jen Palmieri, didn't Chris Christie prove that there's no appetite among Republican voters for an anti-Trump candidate?
Yeah, but there is among general election voters, right? And so I think that that is what, if Haley is sitting Thanksgiving week, regardless, right? They're coming out of Iowa, going into New Hampshire, people are really going to be going after him. That is, and presumably up for the next 8 weeks. I don't know that that's going to hurt him. That could soften him up for the general election. It also shows you what kind of messages are working with people. 60% of the Republican Party is solidly behind Donald Trump right now. That presumably that means 40% is not. Republicans are loyal voters. Most of those people will go home and vote for him, but some measure of them will not. And I think that the Biden campaign is really looking at that tranche of voters to see, over the next 8 weeks in particular, how can they bring some of those to his side.
Mark, basically, are you surprised that Mike Pence, whom you work with so closely, had this strong evangelical base, that Donald Trump is getting the evangelical vote in Iowa?
I think that is surprising because even in 2016, more of that vote went to Ted Cruz. But I don't think there's any doubt that through the 4 years of his presidency, Donald Trump solidified that vote behind him, whether or not it was the Supreme Court nominees or the Dobbs decision or other matters. Now, I will tell you, Angie, I think in many cases, many of those decisions were being pushed by more conservative people in the administration than Donald Trump. But naturally, it accrues to the benefit of the man who's sitting there in the Oval Office. And so I think that support is locked in for him. And I think it's going to be hard for any other candidate to break that apart right now.